Between Avengers Endgame and Game of Thrones, we at ScreenRant are having to deal with a lot of cinematic losses lately. And with everybody focusing on the big dramatic send-offs for beloved heroes, it's easy for some of the dearly departed to go forgotten. But every death in the Marvel Cinematic Universe has led us here in some way. So we're gonna look at 25 of the most important deaths in the MCU and how they impacted our core group of heroes. Consider this an in memoriam for a decade of vital characters. And with that, we should warn you that we plan to spoil every single MCU movie in this video, all the way from Iron Man to Endgame. So if there's a movie or two you've been holding out on, we recommend you catch up before you keep on watching. First off, we want to take a look at the character of the Vision and how he was shaped by the death of Ultron. In this scene, Vision chases down the final Ultron robot and destroys it. They discuss death, with Vision ultimately deciding that it is what makes life worth living. Vision choosing to fight against his creator and choose the side of the Avengers showed that his wisdom was rooted in a humanistic optimism.
But a thing isn't beautiful because it lasts. It's a privilege to be among them.
Her awesome cameo in Endgame reminded us that the Ancient One's death is one of the best scenes in the MCU, and vital to Stephen Strange's journey to maturity. As she stretches out the final moments of her life, the Ancient One, like Ultron, admits that death, the thing she could not understand, scares her. But she tells Strange he must accept the things he cannot understand or even control, a lesson he takes with him all the way to his sacrifice in Infinity War. Next up, we're looking at Quicksilver, the short-lived Avenger whose death deeply affected two of his teammates. Quicksilver's final choice to jump in front of bullets meant for Hawkeye not only must have motivated Scarlet Witch to stay with the Avengers, but influenced Hawkeye's choice to retire as well. It also further bonded the characters of Hawkeye and Scarlet Witch together, leading to some memorable moments in Civil War. And without Quicksilver's sacrifice, Hawkeye wouldn't be around anymore. No Ronin redemption arc, no haircut. Thank you? Looking now at the deaths that shaped T'Challa, also known as Black Panther, we have to start with his father, T'Chaka. T'Chaka's death thrust his son into power and also started him down a dark journey of revenge. Mistakenly believing the Winter Soldier to be responsible for his father's death, T'Challa mercilessly pursued him before realizing at the last moment that he had the wrong man.
I'm done letting it consume me.
T'Challa only managed to redeem himself in the final moments of Civil War, when he pledged to take care of the injured Bucky Barnes. Even in the afterlife, T'Chaka provided guidance to T'Challa. Multiple scenes in Black Panther featured T'Chaka in the Jalaya, a reality which exists outside of time and space. When Zuri tells T'Challa that his father murdered his uncle N'Jobu, it turns the young king's worldview completely upside down. Not only is T'Challa shaken by revelations about his father's past misdeeds, his uncle's rage is channeled into T'Challa's cousin Eric, who attempts to carry out his plans to fruition. N'Jobu and his sudden demise are actually the catalyst to changing T'Challa's isolationist policies. Though he might not have lived to see it, the revolution N'Jobu tried to start in the 90s took root 20 years later in Wakanda. One of the best Marvel deaths of all time, Killmonger's final moments may have secured Black Panther its historic Best Picture nomination at the Oscars, and deservedly so. In addition to that, Killmonger's ideals, if not his violent methods, struck a chord with his cousin T'Challa. If Killmonger's revolution hadn't caused T'Challa to rethink Wakanda's role in the world, he might never have let the Avengers use it as a sanctuary in Infinity War. Moving on to our favorite group of misfits, we're looking at the deaths that shaped the Guardians of the Galaxy, starting with their first major death, Groot. More specifically, the first Groot, also known as Groot the First, Groot Sr., or Hi Groot, I'm Dad. And before you call this out, you can ask James Gunn yourself. This guy and Baby Groot are two different characters. With his heroic sacrifice and memorable group hug, Groot forced the Guardians to accept that they cared about each other. At least a little bit anyway. Next up, we're looking at an Endgame death that might have flown under the radar, Nebula 2014. This death follows some of the character work done in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which found a traumatized Nebula realizing her sister was not her true enemy. Instead, it was her abusive father Thanos. When Nebula shot her former self in order to save Gamora, she wasn't just preventing Thanos from retrieving the Infinity Stones. Nebula was letting go of the pain of her past and proving that Gamora is her sister in more than blood. The evolution of the character truly came full circle in this moment, and we're hoping she remains a permanent part of the Guardians of the Galaxy. For the next few entries, we're going to be looking at the losses that made Peter Quill the Star-Lord he is today, and the most formative loss of his life has to be his mom, Meredith. When young Peter saw his mother die in front of him, he closed himself off emotionally for the next 30 years. In taking the hand of the rest of the Guardians, Peter finally accepted love, and his love for his mother allowed him to free himself of ego's grasp. The death of his mother not only impacted his emotions, but also influenced his taste in music and provided him with a birthday gift he would cherish for years and years. After losing his mother, Peter spent his entire life hoping to meet his biological father. Then he did. Unfortunately, Peter's father Ego wanted to use him as a living battery by draining his life force in order to power his living planet. Long story. He even promised Peter unlimited power if he agreed to do so, but Peter refused a superpowered life in paradise to be with his new family instead. Weirdly, killing his father is one of the most mature things he's ever done. It's just too bad that maturity would disappear by the time Infinity War rolled around. And finally, any list of deaths that affected Peter Quill would not be complete without his weird blue daddy, Yondu.
He may have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy.
Yondu sacrificing his life for Peter proved that he truly loved him as a son, something Peter's biological father never did. This was another step for Peter in accepting his found family in the Guardians. But Peter wasn't the only character Yondu affected. He showed Rocket that it's more fun to do things out of love for other people than out of hatred of yourself. Shifting gears into the deaths that made Captain America, one of the most influential has to be that of Dr. Abraham Erskine, the man who created him. Without Abraham's guidance, anyone could have been picked for the Super Soldier program, but Erskine insisted on Steve Rogers, someone who was bullied and wouldn't use his power to bully others. The Super Serum may have done the heavy lifting, but Captain America is not created until the final moments of Abraham Erskine's life, which he uses to point at Steve's heart. Rogers may not carry a picture of him in a locket like he does with Peggy, but Erskine is definitely a huge influence on his heroic nature. In a deleted scene from the first Avengers film, Cap looks through some files and finds every member of the Howling Commandos dead. With no conflicting evidence, we're taking this as canon. Even though they die off-screen, the Commandos are representative of everyone Steve lost to time. With a whole new world in front of him, Steve is completely alone. With all of his other friends dead, it's no wonder Steve latches on so tightly to both Peggy Carter and Bucky. This loneliness sets the stage for many of his choices, through Winter Soldier and beyond. No matter how many new heroes he teams up with, Rogers will carry the honor and respect he had with the Howling Commandos. On that same theme, Cap's extreme attempts to help Bucky in Civil War can be traced back to the death of Peggy at the beginning of the film. Having to let go of his one other connection to the past only makes it that much harder for Cap to allow the Avengers to arrest Bucky. But really, Steve never got over losing all those years with Peggy in the ice. She was the love of his life, an indisputable fact, sorry Sharon, which leads to his final choice as Captain America. Before her death, a 96-year-old Peggy Carter may have uttered words which directly influenced his plans to travel back in time.
All we can do is our best, and sometimes the best that we can do is to start over.
And starting over is exactly what he did. Next up, we're looking at the many deaths that have influenced our favorite god of thunder, Thor, starting with his mother and Queen of Asgard, Frigga. While Frigga didn't get much screen time in the Thor movies, her death is the first time we see Thor fail to save someone, and it sets the stage for his arc in Infinity War and Endgame. Despite this, Frigga's continued belief in Thor during her flashback scene in Endgame emotionally prepares him for the final battle with Thanos. The reconnection with his mother also influences his decision to hand New Asgard over to Valkyrie and head out for adventures with the Guardians of the Galaxy. It's really been a tough few years for Thor. After losing his mom in Thor: The Dark World, he must deal with Odin's death in Thor: Ragnarok. But even more than that, Thor is forced to reckon with his father's actions. Odin's morally ambiguous past and sudden death force Thor to confront his sister without the confidence of Asgard's might behind him. Odin's final message teaches Thor that he was never great because he was a prince. He was great because he wanted to protect his people. Thor's sister Hela forces him to confront Asgard's colonial history and the dark deeds of his father. Hela makes Thor and the audience consider how Asgard, and by extension real royal families and governments, got all those gold thrones and palaces. Spoiler alert for all of history, it wasn't by asking nicely. Like Killmonger after her, Hela makes us see a paradise in a different light, and forces Thor to finally become a true leader. To defeat Hela, Thor must tear down the institutions that created her and accept that
Asgard is not a place. It's a people.
the murder of Heimdall at the beginning of Infinity War has Thor promise that Thanos will die for that. Thor tries to make good on that promise at the end of Infinity War, and his failure to do so results in the state we find him in at the beginning of Endgame. The death of his best friend sends Thor on a spiral of grief and rage that takes him years to recover from. Heimdall's death doesn't just rattle Thor, it becomes a symbol of all of the people he failed to save. Even when Thor chops Thanos' head off in Endgame, it makes him realize that his grief and guilt is far more powerful than any type of vengeance. The final death we're looking at in relation to Thor has to be his brother Loki. These were brothers who, from childhood, never understood each other. And over the course of the MCU movies, that disconnect only gets worse. When finally in Ragnarok, Loki starts down a path of redemption, it's immediately cut short. Thanos killing Loki robs both him and Thor of the only time, maybe in history, that they have understood each other. After accepting their faults, Thor and Loki truly become brothers. Then Thanos rips all that away and promises Loki won't be coming back from the dead again. Well, at least not in that timeline. Finally, we have the deaths that affected the life of Tony Stark, and we have to start with Dr. Yinsen. Yinsen was the doctor that created Tony's first artificial heart, and it's with the heart that Yinsen builds him both literally and metaphorically that Tony is reborn. Yinsen sacrifices himself to ensure Tony survives and reaches his full potential. For seemingly the first time, Tony Stark met someone who believed he was a good person. That belief changed him forever, starting him on a decade-long journey. Continuing our look at the deaths that most affected Tony, we're looking at his first real superhero fight against Obadiah Stane, also known as Ironmonger. In this fight, Tony has to use everything he's learned as Iron Man so far, from his flight skills to clever uses of his weapons. Tony defeating Obadiah, his father figure and mentor, is when he fully becomes a superhero. Fighting a suit double his size and using his wits to outsmart Ironmonger, Tony's triumph over Obadiah earns him his first I Am Iron Man. While maybe not the most memorable villain, Ivan Vanko, aka Whiplash, established an important through line in the MCU, dealing with the sins of the father. Tony's father Howard ripped off the work of Anton Vanko, a scientist who died without ever seeing profit from his inventions. His son Ivan comes after Tony, looking for revenge. Like Thor, Gamora, Nebula, and T'Challa after him, Whiplash forces Tony to re-examine his relationship with his father. In doing so, he created a narrative thread that came to define phases 2 and 3. Whiplash may not have been mentioned in Endgame, but Tony's journey does come full circle when he meets up with a younger version of his father in 1970. And finally, we have to look at the most formative deaths in Tony Stark's life, that of his parents. Tony's fraught relationship with his father echoes that of the real Robert Downey Jr. and adds narrative weight to the on-screen story. In-universe, not only does his parents' murder set the stage for the final battle of Civil War, but Tony's inability to let go of his parents' death has always been integral to his character. Realizing his dad is proud of who he's become is central to his arc in Endgame. Moving away from the deaths that mainly affect one character, there is one death that seems to affect all of them. That, of course, is Thanos. Both his first beheading, which creates a frustrating lack of closure, and his subsequent more permanent death create lasting effects on multiple characters. Every character in Endgame is dealing with the effects of failing to stop him one way or another, and with one glorious snap, they can finally let that pain go. So whose death could be more important than that? Who else could it be? Coulson's death kicked the on-screen Avengers into gear and permanently wedged the MCU into the cultural landscape. Every fan saw themselves in Coulson, a card-carrying Captain America fanatic who believed in the Avengers as a team. When he died, we couldn't help but continue to believe with him. Even if his TV show deadened the impact a little bit, Coulson's is the death scene that shaped the entire MCU. After all, what are the Avengers without something to avenge? So what do you guys think? Are there any MCU deaths that we missed? Any big fans of Malekith the Accursed out there? Volstagg maybe? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe to ScreenRant for more great Marvel videos.